Hello and welcome to the Creative Commons open source office hours. We're hanging out on codebuddies.org. Today we're working on a task to develop a REST API with WordPress. There are several existing API endpoints, and we just want to modify those first to verify they work, and then to change the output format, or at least add another endpoint that'll return some pre-rendered HTML instead of raw JSON. The idea is we want to render the HTML on the server using WordPress rather than rely on client-side JavaScript to render and manipulate the DOM for accessibility reasons and consistency. So without that said, I'm going to have to make one change here, and then we will get to the development task. All right. So I've started out here. What we've got is a project here for the Creative Commons website, creativecommons.org. And the project consists of a couple of components. Right now we're focused on just WordPress. The Creative Commons website is actually a little more complex than it would seem on the surface. There's a WordPress blog, essentially, a content management system, and there's a couple of Django apps that are also kind of more or less seamlessly integrated into the domain using a kind of a reverse proxy. We're using Nginx to intercept URL paths and direct that request to the backend service, whether it's WordPress or one of the Django services. That should be fairly invisible to the user, who will just feel like they're just visiting a single website. And the look and feel is made consistent through what we call the Creative Commons vocabulary. It's a series of styles that are applied to each of the Creative Commons properties. These WordPress themes use the Creative Commons vocabulary license styles, and the Django projects for the licenses also uses the vocabulary styles. With WordPress, you can define a navigation menu and some other prominent page elements. We want those page elements to also be consistent across the properties, across the licenses. As well as the main site. This is the current theme. You can see there's a header here with navigation menu, as well as footer elements, and these are displayed on all the pages. The new theme also has these elements, they just look different. When you go to licenses and you view a license, it's actually part of a different infrastructure. This page is a pre-rendered HTML using the Django backend. But as you can see, it applies the same styles, the same menus. And the way that's achieved in this modalist donation box, the way these kind of common elements are integrated across different technology platforms is through this REST API that currently returns JSON, and that JSON can be then rendered by server-side, client-side JavaScript. Rather than that, we just want to pre-render that HTML and let the pre-rendered HTML and use that pre-rendered HTML in these other projects. The reason we're going through this whole process is this menu is managed on WordPress. So it can be changed, and we don't want to have to change it in 3 places. Admittedly, this is some accidental complexity we've inherited. Probably, I'm not sure the source of the decisions. Due to limitations of WordPress, it was decided that the licenses would be better maintained with a different technology stack that's more suited for general purpose content management systems. WordPress has come a long way, but it still has some of the blog oriented roots page that make it kind of awkward to do general web development. Although it's got some really strong appeal in terms of the publication flow and content management system that's been enabled by Gutenberg most recently. So it's trade-offs. So basically what I need to do is just use WordPress here and first test our endpoints and then add a couple of endpoints. So instead of returning JSON data, they'll return this render date HTML. So that's as brief as I can put it, what we're working on today. And I want to make sure that our system has the menus that we're expecting. And when we review this, documentation, we'll see that there are several API endpoints defined. They should be available at these paths. And I'm going to test it via CLI. This is coming from the WP theme creativecommons.org. This project has 2 Git submodules. We have a WordPress base theme and this child theme. The base theme contains mainly the styles and common elements for our WordPress properties. This child theme consists mainly of the function filters and the API endpoints. So the best I can figure is in order for these API endpoints to serve up the header menu, footer menu, things like that, the menu has to be defined. So we do have a main menu. I'll just go ahead and save that menu so it's used in all locations. Deprecation warnings. Just grab the whole thing. Actually, let me see where that's being called from. Yes. Not sure if I need that, but let's go. So I'm not so certain about it. So here. A little bit better. Duplicate in. There's two errors here. There's two lines here. Duplicate. And one in. Alright, that way we'll be able to return to that later. Alright, now that the project's running, apparently I should be able to just use HTTPie. Don't click on anything, that'll break stuff. I need to highlight that. Alright, you're gonna see our secret password. Interesting, so 301 moved permanently. Interesting response. And so I got a bug report. I was testing this out yesterday. It didn't quite work. So, whoops. Yeah, that shouldn't be. Okay, that might be. Since I'm using localhost. These are really. Related to what I'm experiencing. Try with a slash. Okay. Now this gave us the whole HTML. So that's the same issue. I mean, this is a different issue. This is the same issue I was experiencing before. If I just run this in a browser. It renders the whole page. This is as if I were to just have visited that page. For example. With the slash, it just kind of renders straight to the blog page, which is, I think, it's set to my home page. Without the slash, I also get home page 301. Maybe the 301 is pending the slash. So it's as if the WP-JSON endpoint's not behaving as it would be expected. So what can I do? Yeah, I mean, I've got the I don't know if this is relating to those deprecations. What I could try to do, I don't think it is, those are like cleanup functions. I'll switch the theme Creative Commons base, which doesn't have a REST API defined. I'll make a dummy endpoint. I'll try with this custom prefix later. But for now, let's just add an endpoint. Bare basics. I'll go one simpler, I'll do just a hello world. Maybe this would be better as a plugin instead of a theme. Oops, that's. All right. So should be good to go. So this might be happening in the Apache htaccess rules that are defined in WPN. Why does it even matter though? Well, there's nothing about a 301 here. hard to check. Not sure. I think that's okay right here. Just let me double check if that had any effect. Interesting. Maybe the prefix has been renamed. Let me shoot this permalink settings. Not sure if that should affect the page though. Huh. That's nuts. Alright, that's obscure. Okay, well, it's a start. Well, it's not just jiggling the handle a second. Trailing slash work? Yes, with not trailing slash. That is definitely obscure. Alright. Just stuff like that doesn't really leave a bad taste in the mouth and doesn't really kind of lend itself to having confidence in WordPress's general development framework. Alright, so does our hello world endpoint work? Yes. Great. We'll summarize it. Welcome to the recap of today's Creative Commons open source office hours. We've been hanging out on codebuddies.org. In today's task, we took a look at the project creativecommons.org, which is a rewrite of the creativecommons.org WordPress theme, including a small REST API that's useful when integrating the creativecommons.org projects. On the surface, creativecommons.org seems like one web property powered by WordPress, but it actually turns out there's at least two or maybe three sub-projects that are all sort of more or less seamlessly integrated. And in order to make that integration feel seamless, we need to make some data available to the non-WordPress properties, the Django property. And that's done by a REST API that currently returns some JSON data, and I believe uses client-side JavaScript or somehow renders the return data, and probably Python actually, because the templates are statically rendered in Python. I'm not quite sure on the details of that. We'll get further into that. My focus so far has been on the API side of it, the picture from WordPress, which, as mentioned, returns JSON data, and we'd like to return some pre-rendered HTML, so we don't have to do any of the downstream rendering. The returned information, the returned data, will be HTML fragments, such as the navigation menu, so that if we update the navigation menu in WordPress, adding a link or changing something or the nesting or anything like that, it will automatically propagate to the sub-properties of creativecommons.org, which are kind of behind a WordPress, a reverse proxy in Nginx, reverse proxy. Again, I'm kind of fuzzy on the actual architecture. I'll get more into it as time permits. Today I've been basically debugging, I guess, the WordPress API. I found a bug that API definitions wouldn't work even when I did a bare hello world, and I was scratching my head as why I couldn't even return anything, a single string. It turned out when the WordPress permalink settings are set to plain, the API endpoint, WP JSON, doesn't seem to work. That's just some part of the WordPress core API, not even my custom endpoint, my hello world endpoint. This is just WP JSON. But by enabling any of these permalink settings, I tried a couple of them, the WP JSON endpoint became available. And I was able to add a custom endpoint by following the REST API handbook, writing a simple function, mine is just a one-liner, and registering an API route. And in my case, I just returned hello world. Let's take a quick look at the code. It's not that different from what we saw on the previous page. But essentially, here's my function. It's just API hello world. It can receive some data, but I'm not doing anything with it. I'm just returning a string. Then I'm adding an action in our functions PHP. I might be able to move this to an API.php or some other means, or even to a plugin that's currently located in the theme. The architecture is up in the air right now. I'm just getting a sense of how things work, one step at a time. So we'll initialize a REST API endpoint, and it takes a callback function, I suppose. when you add the action, and inside that action, this is actually going to register a route with a namespace of hello and a path of world. What happens is your API can be namespace like V1, all the V1 API endpoints go under here, and here's the endpoint world. Now this will take get requests, so method get, and it'll invoke this callback function, hello API, hello world, which returns our string. That wires it up. Everything works. Not that many lines of code. Just under 20 lines of code. Not too bad at all, with a little cleaner indentation than what was in the documentation. So yeah, most of the time spent today was figuring out this weird permalink settings. I would almost call it a bug. You know, it could be misunderstanding. I'm new to API development in WordPress. It was definitely mysterious. If anyone has any idea of how to get these WordPress API routes working with plain permalink settings, I'd be glad to learn. In any case, I'm glad to be past that little bottleneck, and we'll move on in the next sessions to rendering some template HTML fragments and returning those to the client, for example. Okay, well, this has been a CodeBuddies.org hangout where we've been working on open source at Creative Commons. Thank you very much for your time, and have a great day.